And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
It is indeed Friday, and thank you for joining us here on yet another edition of Climate Change Roundtable, this number 73 in a series. I'm Anthony Watts, your host, and with us today we have our usual suspects, Linnea Lueken and Dr. Sterling Burnett. Hi, guys. How you doing today?
Doing okay.
Are you staying cool in the midst of all this hotness out there?
Well, Sterling isn't. It's not too bad here in South Carolina today.
Oh, no.
Right.
That's why the Lord invented air conditioning. I am staying cool, and I've got fans, though mine's not turning because it's cool enough. And later on, I'll be outside where it is hot, but I have a pool. So,
all right. Very cool. And, if it weren't for fossil fuels, you would both be roasting, me included. But, that's another story. So this week, we've had all kinds of madness in the media. I mean, literally, they've gone off the rails this week, outdone themselves in many different venues. Heat wave mania, bathtub, hot tub water temperature mania, global boiling. Yes, that's the new phrase. Let's see. It used to be global warming, and then it was climate change, and then it was climate disruption, and then it was climate crisis, and now it's global boiling. Yes, indeedy. The oceans are just going to boil you alive. Pick shrimp right off the waters of Louisiana and put them in your mouth. It's going to be that good. That's what they think out there. They're nuts. Anyway, let's go to our first.
It just goes to show there are benefits of global warming. If I can pick shrimp off the water, if I can just take a jar of cocktail sauce down to the coast and then just go start picking these things up, that's a good thing, man.
Actually, in Antarctica, there's a tour that goes to one of the volcano islands that is off the peninsula of Antarctica. And there are, in fact, boiled shrimp that are floating in the caldera of this volcano that you can visit. My good friend Charles Rotter has actually experienced this firsthand. And he says you can just pick shrimp right out of the water that are pre-cooked. That'll be the next scare story. Just watch. That's been going on for decades, but that's just the nature of that particular place. All right. Not quite boiling, but darned hot, according to some people. Bathtub and hot tub hot is the story this week from the mainstream media, where they say at the Associated Press, South Florida waters hit hot tub levels and may have set a world record for warmest seawater. Well, no. And in fact, we're going to do something a little bit different here. We're going to do a real-time live debunking of this whole thing. I have a whole bunch of different things prepared. So, and you guys feel free to jump in anywhere. So first thing I want to say is from this AP article, and I'm reading, but the Buoy at Manatee Bay hit 101.1 degrees Fahrenheit, 38.4 degrees centigrade, Monday evening, according to the National Weather Service meteorologist, George Rizzuto. The night before, that buoy showed an online reading of 100.2. Gosh, it seems awful, doesn't it? Well, it is if you don't bother to look at any details. If you just think that that buoy is representative of the Atlantic Ocean temperature, well, then yes, there might be some cause for concern. But the fact is, it is not. Now let's take a look at what the temperatures are today. It's nowhere near 101 degrees. This is the live data from the National Buoy Data Center. And as you can see, scrolling down there, the temperatures are into the 80s. Gosh, where'd those 100 temperatures go? They're no longer there. What happened to the crisis? It's gone. Yeah. So interesting thing about this particular temperature was that it was extremely short-lived. And we have a graph showing what happened this past week. Now, this is from Buoy designated MNBF1, which is in Manatee Bay. And it is actually somewhat inland, away from the Atlantic Ocean. It's actually part of the Everglades National Park. And you can see those two peaks there. There was one on Monday and another one on Tuesday. But look at how fast they go up and look at how fast they go down. And then look at more recent data, which is much, much less. These were just recent peaks, just little peaks that happen, briefly in the space of, an hour or two. And yet the global media grabbed a hold of this and ran with it as if it was representative of climate change. The Guardian reported that, it's indicative of the heat waves and the global, extreme temperatures that we're going to be having, all this kind of stuff. So they're just totally off the rails on reporting this. And the most important thing is that, the placement of where this thing is at, and we have a Google Earth image for this to show you where this buoy is at. And this Google Earth image is just basically right up next to the shoreline. There it is. This is the Google Earth image I grabbed this morning. Here's the buoy, MNBF1. It's not even in the Atlantic Ocean. It's at a point on a bay called Manatee Bay, which is inland behind the barrier islands, such as Key Biscayne and all that stuff. So it's actually kind of in this very shallow pocket of warm water, which is normal for it to get very warm during the summer. And if you look closely, you can see bottom features on this thing. You can see right through the water down to the bottom. That says it's exceptionally shallow. And that's one of the reasons why the temperature went up so fast and went down so fast, because when the sun heats the bottom of that, and it goes right to the bottom at that kind of a shallow depth, and because the bottom is dark, as you can see in this picture, and everybody knows darker things absorb more sunlight, it heated up the water. And maybe there were some conditions then that enabled this. Maybe the water flow stopped because currents changed or something, maybe the water stagnated. Maybe somebody parked their boat nearby and was doing fishing, and the hot water coming out of the motor was, jacking up the temperatures. Who knows? But the media ran with this as if it were some climate change fact. And
it concerns me that they did represent it as if it was the Atlantic Ocean, as opposed to brackish water inland on the coast in the Everglades, which is going to be warmer water anyway. My suspicion is there's not a lot of circulation going on right there. Because honestly, Anthony, that's certainly not the story you get. You're assuming this is a buoy off some beach somewhere that people are swimming in, and so they say, we don't need the hot tub today. We're going to sit here and just lounge in the seawater and be warm.
Well,
man, it's egregious that how they hype something like that.
Well, and it's not even unusual. 100 degrees is unusual, obviously, but the idea of the coastal Atlantic along Florida and even up the East Coast being like bathwater temperatures, that's always been a complaint of people who go places like where I live now in South Carolina on the coast, that in the summer, in July, August, September even, the water is so warm that the jellyfish are really bad, and you're not even really getting cooled off going into the water when you're at the beach. I mean, that's been the complaint forever about this coast. So I wouldn't take it too seriously.
Well, that's exactly right. You shouldn't take it seriously at all, because the media did not do their homework at all in this. They just took that number and ran with it, Seriously, that's all they did. And the incompetency on display, particularly of Seth Bornstein at the Associated Press, was just pathetic. Anyway.
But it's not incompetency, it's deception. You're such a kind man, Anthony. You always give people the benefit of the doubt. You always say, they misunderstand, or they lack science knowledge, or no, they lie. They know the truth, and they deliberately tell a falsehood. They mislead. There's a reason. It's about power. It's about influence. It's about pushing the climate crisis narrative. But it is not incompetence. It's not, I don't think it's even laziness. It is deliberate deception.
Yeah, I get that, but I ascribe to this phrase, and I forget who said this, but never ascribe malice to what can be explained by simple incompetency. So it could go either way.
Well, I think with the case with Seth over at the AP, it's probably malice because he does this for a living. I mean, he's always, you can't make the same kinds of mistakes and never post a retraction over and over and over again and not have it be something that you're doing on purpose. Yeah. But for the rest of them, I mean, you look at the story reposted by CNN or somewhere else that doesn't have as embedded a climate news desk. They're not as deeply involved in this stuff. And I can imagine the journalist is just being lazy. They don't bother to check because they don't really care, because they already believe that the Earth is being catastrophically heated by human emissions of carbon dioxide. And so they're not going to do extra due diligence to try to prove themselves wrong.
Well, you got to think about who's doing climate journalism, right? They are journalists. They probably all went to journalism school, but they went into the particular realm of journalism that they're in, environmental and climate journalism, because they were activists first. They were interested parties. They didn't come into it with, we want to learn and tell people stories that accurately reflect the state of the environment. It's, we're concerned about the environment and we need to get more stories about the dangers to the environment out there. And so that's what we do. I mean, you know, when the AP takes millions of dollars from alarmist foundations that fund alarmist activist work to hire journalists specifically to report on the climate crisis, that is not, it's not coincidence. That's not a failure to check the facts. That is activist-driven journalism.
Yeah, you could probably call it ACTA publishing. All right, so let's go back to that picture of Google Earth. And then, well, you saw the picture of Google Earth. Here it is, how close it is to the shore. I mean, it's literally right on the shore, and you can see right to the bottom. Okay, so one thing that could explain these temperatures is the tides. So I went and looked at the tide table. And as you look at the tide, you know, we saw this low tide right around the time of the high temperature. Well, then when you look at the data table and you discover that the data table showed that at 2200 hours, the temperature reached 38.4 C or 101 F. And you can see it building, you know, from 1900 hours, it went from 35 all the way up to 38.4 in the space of 4 hours. So what's going on here? The tide's going down and the sun is continuing to heat the water. So those factors right there could explain why this buoy went to such a high temperature. It's in shallow water. It's not really in the ocean. It's right next to shore. It's above a dark bottom that's absorbing sunlight, and we've got the tide. So all these things combined, it's just.
Do we know? Can we tell from this? I reading it small screen. How shallow the water is there at low tide? I mean,
well,
could I
Boy,
climb up the shore and walk out to the buoy and put my arms around it like a friend?
Okay, here's my pitch. Climate Change Roundtable field trip. We are going to go visit this. We're going to go to the Everglades and we are going to go visit this buoy.
We have our summer offices for the Arthur B. Robinson Center down in Florida.
Yeah,
Terrible
good luck getting
thing to
that
do.
through the
I mean-
expense report. All right. So here's the other thing that the media completely missed. This has happened before. So here we have a plot of the data. And this is from Manatee Bay, MNBF1, showing the daily maximum water temperature. Hey, guess what? It happened before, back on this August 15th of 2017, 102 degrees. Oh, no. Gosh, but the world was reporting it was a world record. The media was certain of it. Didn't bother to check. Also, if you go back to just before 2010, in 2009, you can see it hit the 100-degree mark. It's happened before. It's just simply this buoy, this placement of this buoy is prone to these kinds of temperatures because of its placement and design. And so
it's not just prone to high temperatures, it's prone to wild temperature swings.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if it's sustained at a level. It's going radically far up and down. I wager most ocean buoys don't have that kind of a temperature swing daily.
Right. And this is because it's in shallow water, and the shallow water is responding to the change in the atmospheric temperature and the change in local conditions. They have cloud cover, the change in the bottom, whether it's dark or sand or whatever. It's not really representative of anything. It's certainly not representative of climate change. And one temperature on one buoy in Florida does not indicate a climate change crisis. And yet the media would have you believe this because they're either incompetent or they're just mendacious or both. I don't know.
Nor does it represent the ocean. I mean, they make it sound in these stories like that buoy represents the ocean temperatures there, that everything's going crazy, that you could be 40 miles from there, but that's the ocean temperature. And that's not the case. But I believe you said that we actually do know how shallow that buoy is.
Yeah. From what I can tell, it's about 1.5 meters, but the tide swings, basically, from what I can tell, and again, we may need a field trip to figure this out, because the data is not completely clear on it, but it looks like this buoy may actually get close to bottoming out at very low tides.
I was about to say 1.5 meters is what, 4.5 feet or so. And I can
this chart says that the sensor is at 5 feet.
5 feet. And I wonder if that's at normal tide, high tide, or mid tide. But if it's at high tide during low tide, it's probably pretty close to 2 feet or something. The bottom of it may be touching the bottom. Wow.
Well, and depending on what the tide swing is, I mean, out here we have like 8-foot tides or more in some areas. So it's it can be very substantial. I mean, it could be literally just laying in the mud flats.
Yeah.
It's just really sad that the media is so incompetent that they cannot, or malicious, whatever, can't go and do this basic fact checking. Instead, they just take these temperatures and run with it and shout gloom and doom without paying any attention to actual facts. Speaking of not paying any attention to actual facts, the big thing this week was from the UN. Yes, the UN Secretary General Guterres, what's his name? I still miss Boutros Ghali. He was easy to remember. But global boiling. Yes, indeed. The UN has announced that global boiling is now the new big problem. And, even though it doesn't matter that the temperature in Florida at 101 degrees is still 111 degrees short of the boiling point at sea level. No. It's global boiling. And we've got a video clip of this clown doing exactly what he does best, lying.
For scientists, it is unequivocal. Humans are to blame. All this is entirely consistent with predictions and repeated warnings. The only surprise is the speed of the change. Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just the beginning. The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived. The air is unbreathable, the heat is unbearable, and the level of fossil fuel profits and climate inaction is unacceptable. Leaders must lead.
Oh, no!
I wonder, he said it's unbearable. Global boiling. I wonder if that is borne out by the number of people going to the beaches in various places. Did suddenly the beaches in Miami empty out this past week because of the boiling, or in Mallorca, or in Fiji, where I think my sister is going to honeymoon soon in Bora Bora? Will they flee to the mountaintops because the ocean is boiling? I didn't see that news. I didn't see the hordes of people rushing to the Art Deco buildings in Miami from the beach because the ocean was boiling. But maybe I missed it. Maybe
well, Sterling, and I've been making this joke a couple times lately because they've been leaning so hard into the wet bulb temperature idea, right? Or the idea that we're going to reach temperatures and humidity. Yeah. Well, that, and also they're talking about, they've been referencing wet bulb, and they say things like at 90 degrees, the outdoors are unsurvivable in wet bulb conditions. So what they're saying is there's a particular combination of theoretical humidity and temperature, at which point your body can no longer perspire to cool itself off. And so you get into trouble that way. So I've been joking that they're talking about like global sous vide. We're all just going to be boiled in our own skin because the temperature is so high and the humidity is so dangerous. And it's just all sorts of theoretical stuff that
I'm convinced these people have never stayed outside in Houston or New Orleans for any extended period of time.
Well, Sterling, they probably have, but they don't think of it. They don't connect it at all. They do not connect what they witness or what they experience in their everyday life to any kind of empirical refutation of what they see on the news, right? If the news is telling them it hasn't rained in 100 years in this area, and they know that it just rained last week because they were outside and it was raining, they will flush that memory from their brain and they will go with, we've never seen rainfall here before. This is a catastrophe. I mean, it's unbelievable when you talk to some people.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they take any event that seems slightly out of normal and immediately ascribe it to climate change. And they do so without any factual basis whatsoever.
Well, I'm convinced that the people on the beaches are voting with their feet as to whether it's unbearable. He can say what he wants, but unless people are abandoning the coasts en masse, he's wrong. It's perfectly bearable. And in fact, they wake up in the morning, they pack their little bags with beach towels and their umbrellas, and they're voting with their feet, heading to the water, heading to the boiling point. And, I don't know what to say. Reality needs to slap this guy in the face if no one in person will.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just really embarrassed I'm embarrassed for the planet when this idiot Guterres goes out and says global boiling. I mean,
well, as far as I know, he hasn't stumbled going up steps, so give him that much credit.
Yes. Well, maybe we should invite him on our field trip down to Manatee. Oh, my goodness.
He doesn't seem like very much fun. I don't want to hang out with him.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So let's go to something a little more palatable than global boiling. How about beer? Yes, indeed. There have been stories out there that say climate change is going to affect beer production, and so forth and so on. Well, here's an interesting note. Hops for beer flourish under solar panels. They're not the only crop thriving in the shade. So this is a novel idea. Plant hops under solar panels. And hops, of course, is one of the main ingredients of beer. And so it's a win-win, at least by some viewpoints. It's like there's always a silver lining that you can find in any kind of a disaster. There's something positive you can find in this stuff. Like with global boiling, you can pick ready-to-eat shrimp right out of the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, hops may be thriving under solar panels, and if so, good for them. I wonder what happened to whatever was there before, and whether are we now going to plant hops in the deserts of California? Well, you have to water them, but the desert tortoises aren't doing so well in those areas, so. I guess it's a trade-off. More IPA for me.
There you go. Anything we can do to improve the production of hops and beer, I'm all for that.
Yeah. Well, They talk about this kind of stuff all the time, right? They were saying that you can graze cheap between the panels and stuff. But one of the reasons why they keep most solar fields so closely mown is because you really cannot have any shade on a solar panel. I have a little solar panel that I use to run a pump. And of course, this is not comparable to the kind of panels that they use for power generation on a larger scale, at least I hope. Because if I walk outside and I put my finger over one section of this, like 1 foot by 1.5 foot solar panel, it turns off the fountain immediately. Like even that small, tiny amount of
Linnea's giving solar the finger.
Shuts down the entire the entire system. So I don't know if that's going to work for them long term, or what their capacity or their actual output is looking like.
It may be good for hops. I suspect it's not good for birds.
Yeah.
I don't think people want to. I think I'll get a tan. I'm going to go sit on this solar panel and soak up some rays. Talking about cooking eggs on a hot surface.
Yeah, one thing I have not seen, and this is actually quite plausible to do, because solar panels can get up to about 150 degrees during peak sun. I have not seen anyone try to cook eggs on solar panels yet.
Mm-hmm. And how do you if they're pretty, no one talks about, or rarely does anyone talk about this. We know that over time, solar panels lose effectiveness, their efficiency, but they have to stay clean. They have to stay clean. And so do you hire people? How labor intensive is that to go out and to be the solar panel cleaner? Or, how often do you have to clean them? And where's that water coming from? Because that sounds pretty resource intensive to me, pretty water intensive. In a place where the aquifers are already being drained. Let's say a place on the West Coast that depends on a river called the Colorado, where they constantly complain they don't have enough water already. But now we're having to take water from endangered species and farmers and cities to wash solar panels. That seems to me to be a bad idea.
Well, yeah, there's lots of bad ideas out there related to climate change and solar panels and everything else. But, they still get press and they still happen. All right. So our next topic is, yes, indeed, you've heard it before, but here it is again. We're going to get plagues. That's right. Climate change is going to bring plagues. Now, the website called Grist is doing a special deal with the Associated Press. They're conniving or conspiring or collaborating or whatever you want to call it for this Climate Connections to say that under a warming planet, pathogens and other things are going to be coming our way, diseases too, and bugs. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see this section where they talk about rising temperatures. And it's, bring in the ticks, bring in the mosquitoes, there it is right there. They show that there's going to be a 6-degree temperature rise from 2041 to 2060, rising temperatures. Well, where do you think that comes from? It comes from the RCP 8.5 climate model, the one that has been completely debunked by science as being impossible and that we should stop using. This happened in a peer-reviewed paper a couple of years ago, but they're still using it. They're out there trying to use it as a justification for the plagues coming our way. Dengue fever, mosquitoes, malaria,
As if there's a place that mosquitoes currently don't inhabit that carry diseases that they haven't inhabited for hundreds or thousands of years. Basically, at least earlier they were arguing, yeah, well, of course the U.S. has had malaria and these diseases, and so did Europe. But now you'll get it higher and higher up the mountains, of course, where fewer and fewer people live. So the argument is you'll add an additional few thousand around the globe to the million plus affected by malaria each year, as opposed to, well, we can use the tools that we wiped out malaria in the U.S. and other places in the meantime and make sure that no matter how high warming goes and those mosquitoes rise, there won't be malaria because there won't be mosquitoes. We don't talk about that.
It's the mosquito thing in particular is very strange because we know that mosquito-borne malaria was endemic to Northern Europe, like Sweden and Norway. During like the Little Ice Age and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
In the
it's been
US.
everywhere. And in the US, so here's a story that a lot of people don't know about that is just nuts. And it still is this bad up in like Minnesota and stuff to an extent today. So people associate mosquitoes with the tropics, but they are a lot worse in the piney woodlands way up north. There are stories from settlers moving west in the 1800s in the kind of middle provinces of Canada that said that the mosquitoes were so bad that if you didn't have mosquito netting and stuff that you put over your horses at night, they would be killed by the morning by the number of mosquitoes harassing them all night and basically panicking them to death.
Oh my.
And just like layers of mosquitoes landing on you and stuff like that. So this is not a recent new thing to have a problem with mosquitoes. And frankly, it's probably a lot better now than it was then, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I want to point out that this model that they're using to base this temperature on in this 2041 to 2061, temperature growth scenario, this RCP 8.5 model is completely impossible. We did a story last year at Climate Realism about, honestly, science is reporting it for the first time that these climate models are running too hot. And this Climate Realism first reported in August 2021, the climate model called Representative Concentration Pathway 8.5 produces implausibly hot forecast of future warming. A group of climate scientists argues in a commentary published in Nature that researchers should no longer use the average of all the climate model projections, which contains the RCP 8.5. And so, but what happens? People like the Associated Press and Grist go out and use it. And they use it to justify the alarming stories that they are putting out, which have, once again, as we've demonstrated today, no basis in fact.
Well, what's worse is, as you wrote in that story, Anthony, I think that's one of yours,
Yes.
that the scientists, and this includes the IPCC, the people who did this, they said you shouldn't use the averages that include the model because it skews the average so high. They didn't even say, it's not, they're saying, warning, don't use 8.5. They're saying 8.5 so bad, don't use the averages that include 8.5.
Yeah.
It's like, and this is not hidden. This is not unknown. Scientists who've been interviewed have said it again and again and again that we never considered 8.5 plausible. It was never, it's treated by these people that want to exploit it as business as usual. They never said it was business as usual. And yet the media, I don't know if they buy it hook, line, and sinker, or they collaborate to promote the idea that these things have some basis in reality and that they're not using a model that has been completely discredited.
Yeah. And, we have, they're basically what they're saying here in this AP/Grist collaboration is that the plagues are coming. And it's because of the temperatures going up, it's going to be mosquitoes, dengue fever, malaria, all this other stuff. But we've debunked this stuff again and again and again on Climate Realism. For example, back when Fauci was a big deal and COVID was a big deal, they tried to make it all about climate. Because, what could be more alarming that COVID is being driven by climate change, And that's what these people like this fool at the UN, Guterres, is out there trying to do. They're trying to motivate you to change your lifestyle based on the fear that they spew. And that fear is a powerful motivator if you're not smart enough to see through it. And it's just sickening. All right, so we've got another one. Esquire, climate change is not causing the spread of diseases. So we talked about this article. They actually did some good reporting here. And And Sterling, this is one of your articles. What do you remember about it?
Now, gosh, this is a while back, but I mean, basically, they looked at the facts. They said, look, there's no evidence that viruses that existed that have gone dormant are suddenly becoming not dormant. That the permafrost is thawing, and diseases from 10,000 years ago that we haven't seen haven't seen since then are coming back. That there's no evidence that mosquito-borne diseases are affecting more people. Basically, it was an honest reporting, just debunking some alarmism. And at Climate Realism, we like to we spend most of our time critiquing dishonest or misleading news stories, but we like to give credit where credit's due when they get one right. We like to say, "Attaboy, thanks for."
This one on screen is not one of those times. Esquire was doing the normal climate hype.
It says sorry, climate change not causing. Oh,
yeah.
Well, I thought Anthony said that this story said that I misread that. There you go.
All right, so we've got another one about dengue fever and CNN. CNN, they're one of the worst reporting outlets out there. They're talking about climate change is going to cause more mosquitoes and dengue fever. Mosquito-borne disease, dengue fever is going to be spreading. It's completely false. The data shows this. I mean, it's madness that they go to these links to scare people when the data says completely otherwise. This is also one of your articles, Sterling.
Well, I guess I haven't gone back and looked at these in a while, but all these articles say the same thing. They claim uniformly that climate change is going to cause the spread of diseases, and we go through the data and the research that shows that that's not true. One of the best, it's a couple of years old now, but one of the best sources to look at, because the data really hasn't changed, to look at to debunk any claims that climate change is causing the spread of tropical diseases or infectious diseases is Climate Change Reconsidered Biological Impacts. That study, copiously footnoted and referenced, shows for disease after disease, for claim after claim, it's just false. But that report, and the studies that it references, because they're not alarming, they get ignored by the media. They're peer-reviewed, but they're ignored by the media. Why? Because it doesn't advance the climate crisis narrative.
Yeah, we have a publication at the Heartland Institute called the NIPCC, the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change. And this is a publication that was done by the Heartland Institute over 5 years ago. But it's a comprehensive, literally a Bible. It's like phone book thick. Yep. And it's got everything you'd ever want to know about this sort of stuff in it. And you can download a free copy from the Heartland Institute if you go to the website. The free copy is available. And you can use it as a reference for just about any argument you're ever going to come up against, either in the media or on social media, to talk about, the way they blow this stuff out of proportion. Okay, one of the things they said in the AP GRIST collaboration article is that climate change is here. People are suffering and dying. Right there, they say it, And, well, gosh, that's just not true. When you go and you look at all of the data, and the data makes a very spectacular graph. We've got a graph that shows climate change-related deaths from 1920 to 1921. And look at that. It's nearly zero compared to what it used to be. I mean, we're looking at 500,000 deaths per decade in around 1920 or so versus in 2021, just, a couple of thousand. So where's the crisis?
Well, I think they might get away with saying, "Oh, those two statements are both true. Climate change is here, and people are dying, and people are always dying."
Well, yeah, if you take it literally, I guess.
Yeah, if you take it that way, it's like, oh well, that's true. The problem is the first statement has very little, if anything, to do with the second statement, because climate change isn't causing the dying. One of the articles that I wrote on climate realism earlier this week specifically dealt with the claims that made by the Washington Post climate coach. Put me in, coach. Put me in the climate war, coach. The climate coach said heat deaths are the largest climate cause of death in the United States. And it's just false. I mean, it's not a disputable point. It's not a matter of opinion. It is what all the peer-reviewed research says. It is what all the research in the US says. It is what the research says globally. Deaths from non-optimum temperatures are declining. Cold weather deaths far outnumber the number of heat deaths. And that's true in the United States as well as everywhere else by 10 to 17 to 1. It's indisputable. And yet he says that with a straight face as if it's a fact.
Yeah. We have an article here on climate realism that basically is maligning the Washington Post, which erroneously reports about more people dying due to heat. But the bottom line is there was a study a couple of years ago published in The Lancet. This is the most prestigious medical journal on the planet that showed unequivocally that we have had more deaths associated with cold temperatures by a factor of 10 to 1 than warm temperatures. We are better able to mitigate and withstand warm temperatures than we are cold temperatures.
But you understate the case, Anthony. It wasn't a study. The Lancet's published at least 4 studies that say the same thing.
Right.
Since 2015. Right. And these studies are huge. They're among the largest studies I've ever seen in history, accounting for hundreds of thousands of deaths by dozens of scholars across countries around the world. It's not as if there's this one study that's the outlier. No. Every study, every huge study says the same thing. And how this guy could miss that, could outright state what is patently false, I don't know.
Well, part of this makes me think from kind of a sociological perspective. Isn't it interesting that this kind of thing, or like what people were talking about earlier with that article that ran from an Italian woman who fainted from the heat in her apartment, that kind of thing, makes international news. There are, of course, other countries, other places in the world where there are serious, horrific deaths happening all the time. But doesn't it say something about the status of our safety and health that this kind of stuff makes international news when, even just 100 years ago, child mortality was way higher. There were all sorts of horrible diseases running around like polio and stuff that people were dying of left and right. And that didn't even hardly make the news unless it was a big outbreak. So doesn't it speak very well of how far we've come in terms of standard of living, that this kind of thing is reported on so much? I mean, they're writing articles about people getting heat stroke on a work site in South Texas. That's such a no-brainer. I mean,
they're majoring in minors by featuring anecdotes and ignoring larger trends. And you know what? The one reason that's really, really dishonest is because climate change doesn't occur on a day or a week. It occurs over long periods of time. And so if climate is affecting diseases or heat deaths or hurricanes or any other type of extreme weather event, you see it in the trend lines, and that's precisely where you don't see it.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, so let's go on to the next topic here. The other alarmism this week, ocean currents are going to collapse. Well, this is hilarious because our president, James Taylor, has been tracking this particular story for about a decade. And it's like every other year, ocean currents are going to collapse. Ocean currents are going to speed up. Ocean currents are collapsing or slowing down. Oh, no, speeding up again. They go back and forth on this. Science can't decide whether it's slowing down or speeding up or staying stationary or whatever. Linnea wrote a wonderful takedown of this garbage, and it's madness because the media is like, we don't even have a memory of a year ago when we wrote a story saying exactly the opposite.
Well, it's hilarious, Anthony, because it's kind of like someone standing on a beach and watching a wave come in and being like, "Oh my gosh, sea levels are rising," and then it's dropping, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, sea levels are falling." It feels a lot like that. This one is interesting though, and Eric Worrell, who posts on WhatsApp with that quite often for you, Anthony, he wrote a very good analysis, and he pointed out that one of the reasons why they are freaking out about, the idea of a collapse of a particular current in the North Atlantic is because there is a current theory in paleontology, or I guess, I don't know, climate science in general, that the Younger Dryas sudden, very abrupt ice age was caused by a collapse of this particular current due to the influx of meltwater from Greenland. And so taking that at face value, you can think, okay, well, if Greenland is supposedly melting, the ice sheet's there, then maybe this can happen again. But what the media neglects to mention in their articles is the reason why we think that the Younger Dryas was caused by something like this is because a dam, basically an ice dam, broke that emptied a lake the size of, like, I don't know, Illinois into the North Atlantic and the Arctic, causing a very sudden influx of fresh water into the ocean. And that's what disrupted the current.
Cold fresh water.
Yeah. And so the idea that, we don't have anything like that now. We don't have any freshwater lakes sitting behind an ice dam ready to burst at any minute because of global warming. So this is a condition that is quite unlikely to reoccur because of a slow melting over time. But it doesn't stop them from creating some very creative and very complicated statistical analyses of these ocean trends. And it's very difficult to follow. I'm not a statistician, so reading that paper was a real headache. But and it is the most notable thing about the particular study that they've been referencing most recently is just how wishy-washy they are. They'll say in their conclusion and in their abstract, they say that they have a 95% certainty that this ocean current is going to collapse between like 2025 and 2095. 95% certain that that we are going to have an actual ice age apocalypse in the next couple of decades. Meanwhile, in their actual paper, in the discussion section, they're talking about like, well, we actually made a lot of assumptions that led to that, and we're not sure about the assumptions that we made. So really, our certainty is a lot lower. But based on all the assumptions we made being true, our certainty is 95%. And I'm like, man, I don't like statistics at all if this is how it works. It doesn't seem real to me.
It's beautiful that they said that. They say it in the discussion section. They say it elsewhere that, our models could be wrong. Our assumptions could be wrong. Our data inputs could be wrong, but we're 95% certain. The two interesting things that come out of this, it seems to me, is that we don't know what the ocean currents were doing 100 years ago. We don't have data from that. They make assumptions that the ocean currents are basically in some kind of steady state, but we can be pretty clear that they haven't been in a steady state. But what they are clear on is that whether ocean currents are increasing or decreasing, whether they're about to collapse or whether they're about to go out of control with speed, the answer is big government and reducing carbon dioxide emissions. It's just like when it was global cooling back in the 70s and then became global warming, the answer was always the same. No matter what the problem is, bigger government is the answer. Even
and
if
more
the problem
taxes.
even if the bigger government, more taxes, because big government requires more taxes. So no matter what the problem is, even if the last prediction of a problem was wrong, the answer remains the same. And of course, that's because they say, the articles that say, well, it's getting faster. Oh, that causes all sorts of bad climate disasters. Oh, it's getting slower. Well, that causes all sorts of bad climate changes. And the funny thing is, whether it's faster or slower, the climate changes seem to be the same. More hurricanes, freezing, large areas that weren't frozen before will now become frozen. Hurricanes will worsen. Seas will rise. Whether it's slower or faster, they're going to have the same results. That's crazy.
It is crazy. And, speaking of crazy, I get mail. Yes, people send me stuff. I get mail from crazies on a regular basis. One this week from Susan Whedon came into my Heartland email account, and she says, thanks to people like you who work for the fossil fuel industry to spread their propaganda, people are suffering and dying. Ugh. So I couldn't let that go. So I decided to write an article on What's Up with that and basically explain, number one, I have never taken a dime from any fossil fuel company, whether it's oil or gas or natural gas or whatever. Just never happened. They don't even know who the hell I am. So literally. And the same thing goes for the Koch brothers. I had Michael Mann spewing garbage about me being in the employ of the Koch brothers. They don't know who the hell I am. They've never sent me a dime. And that goes for my colleagues, and it goes for everyone at the Heartland Institute. We don't get any money from fossil fuel interest. Way back when, yes, there was some money, but less than 5% of the budget, but that stopped in 2006. And it wasn't until around 2007 and 2008 that the Heartland Institute ramped up its climate change program. And so literally there's never been any money coming in whatsoever from fossil fuel interests to, help educate the public against some of this dreck that gets published on a regular basis. And I pointed out on this article that this lady, I'm sorry, you're just flat wrong. It's not there. I did get an email back from her, basically then quoting a Twitter piece from Michael Mann saying exactly what I told her we're not doing, right? It's a 12-year-old or 11-year-old tweet from Michael Mann. That was her rebuttal. Ugh.
I will say, I encourage the fossil fuel industry to stop funding idiots and bad environmental programs and people who want to destroy them and start sending money our way.
Yeah.
I encourage them, let's make the rumor true.
Yeah.
And
Come
help
on,
us,
excellent.
because that helps us spread the message of liberty and liberty government and sound science.
But as Anthony said in his response, we're not pay to play.
No,
We're not changing our opinions based on what kind of funding or anything comes in. If you like what we do, then you can pitch us $1 and it helps, and maybe pitch us a couple dollars and we can go check out that buoy in South Florida. No,
yeah. Look,
we take the most elaborate vacations here.
We would honestly rake in far more money. We could get government grants if we just toe the party line, because there's far more money in the party line than there is in telling the truth about climate change. There are not just millions or billions, tens of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars being spent every year promoting the climate crisis narrative, funding research that supports the climate crisis narrative, flying people around the world to meetings that support the climate crisis narrative. A fraction, a minuscule fraction of that amount is supporting us and our allies in fighting this madness.
Well, and I would say I think it's a major problem that fossil fuel companies are terrified of supporting an organization like Heartland. I think it's a major issue that we would really like to see solved, you guys. Like,
Just think of
you
what
know,
we could do if we got funding like some of these other organizations.
look at what we're doing for the fossil fuel industry without getting any money from them. Just imagine if we.
I think it says something about us, and it says something about our entire movement, that we're batting. We're fighting so far above our weight in fighting this stuff. There is a reason we haven't been steamrolled into the kind of stuff that Europe has done so far, and it's because of people like the Heartland Institute, because of people like that are on this screen today. And it's our allies at other research institutes that have been fighting this war since 1988, when what's his name from NOAA first made it an issue. Hansen first brought it up at Al Gore's phony staged climate hearing. So we've been fighting above our weights, and we've been holding off the worst. We haven't defeated every bad policy and decision, but we have done well. We are not Germany. We are not Spain. We have held off here, and we could use support to keep fighting.
Yeah. So I want to go back to this hate mail story just one last time and point out something that this lady said. That she said, go up to the top there, please. Go up to the top. Okay, she says, spread their propaganda. People are suffering and dying. Well, as we pointed out with that graph that we showed you earlier, that, climate-related deaths are approaching zero. So where are people suffering and dying? Yeah, some people who make bad life choices, who try to go live off the grid. There was a story this week about people that went to live off the grid who weren't even experienced in doing this. They'd never tried it before. And all three of them died during the winter from cold and starvation and whatever. They made bad life choices. And then there's some people in some impoverished parts of the world that, can't afford electricity, much less air conditioning, or electricity is not even available. But the bottom line is that the majority of the world, the majority of the human population is doing quite well in this age. In fact, you could call it a golden age of survivability, because people are not dying related to weather incidents and heat incidents and everything else like they used to. There's just no evidence for it. And yet people like this lady believe the propaganda that is being spewed on the other side by people like Dr. Michael Mann, who say that it's worse than ever and people are dying because of climate change. Well, it's just absolute horsebucky.
Well, Anthony's 100% right. The other, you talk about people, I heard how bad the hurricane was. People died in the hurricane. Well, who died in the hurricanes? The majority of those that died in the hurricanes, they were the people that ignored every warning to abandon their homes and leave with plenty of warning in advance. They're the people that stayed.
Climate change caused them to abandon common sense. That's what it was.
That may well be it. Climate, they say climate's causing craziness. Maybe it's causing loss of common sense as well. I don't know. Climate change.
Yeah.
It causes, as we say, it causes everything.
It does. It's the universal boogeyman. All right, we're time for questions and answers. Those of you who have been watching, I'm sure you've probably got some interesting questions and comments. Let's see some. Oh, here's a super chat here. Thank you.
All right. Now you notice she said, it says starting. I thought it said sterling, the fund for your Buoy. I was very happy for a second. I thought, straight to my bank account. No, starting. Yeah.
All right. So what's being done to challenge morons reporting fake data, highest temps in history? Well, I wrote a scathing article about this last week on climate realism that talks about the fact that this highest temperature, on July 4th, July 5th, was all based on a computer model output and not real actual temperatures. And I also wrote a story about how temperatures in the United States, are not representative of of, seeing things getting worse because the majority of stations are not reporting, weather stations out there are not reporting, increased temperatures above the 95th percentile. Only about 16 to 18% of them are doing so. So
I think we reported, I think we had 3 or 4 stories on that 1 week or in 2 weeks, because, this has been going on since July 4th. So I think over 2 weeks, we published 4 stories on that topic. I think one of my lead essays in Climate Change Weekly, I'm getting old, so it's hard to remember each one, but I'm sure I published a lead essay on that, or I republished yours. That's what happened, Anthony, is I republished yours.
And we had a fantastic article in Fox News just a couple of days ago by our associate, Justin Haskins, who wrote about the issue, about how this is being hyped, and it's not, but the real data says otherwise, and it's gotten a lot of play. So yes, every week, right here on this show, plus on climaterealism.com, you can find articles that push this stuff back.
It's Linnea putting on the tinfoil hat time. I've been considering very strongly this summer that I believe that because of the anticipation of El Nino returning, I believe that they had all of these, this is the hottest summer ever recorded stuff kind of pre-scripted out, pre-canned for the United Nations, for major news sources, especially things like the AP climate desk. And they're just kind of filling in the blanks, despite the fact that the data actually isn't really bearing that out this summer. It's been, pretty normal, it seems, for the most part.
They wrote the obituary before the patient died, like they
exactly.
often do. Yeah. No, look, back in, I'm guessing may have been late April, they started predicting the La Nina's disappearance and El Nino's appearance, and that they said it would likely push us above 1.5 degrees, of course, which that means we're all dead, because that's the tipping point according to 2015. But a group of colleagues and I, we were working on that. We actually had a press release when they did the day they declared El Nino, made it official, because we knew that even though copious stories, El Nino is going to cause a rise in temperatures, as soon as the temperatures rose, El Nino would disappear from the conversation and it would all be climate change.
Yep, exactly.
All right, next question. What do we got? S. David Genske asked, did any of their models predict this current heat wave? Well, that's a good question. There's 2 kinds of models out there. There's forecast models, and yes, the forecast models run by the Weather Service on a daily basis did in fact predict these heat waves, a week or so out. So that's that. But climate models, no, they're not that granular in terms of time. They can't predict individual weather events.
Well, they can if we go to attribution studies, and they can tell you exactly what percentage of chance that these heat waves wouldn't have happened without climate change. These false attribution studies that are rushed out within 2 days of a major announcement.
So we have this other question here from Gorilla R. Okay. Anthony, you said in your comprehensive surface data report last year that the Climate Division's data set is being adjusted to match the USCRN. USCRN shows more warming, so wouldn't they be adjusting the USCRN instead? Well, they don't adjust the USCRN at all. At least that's what they claim. I found no evidence of any adjustments going on. What they did, instead of just simply switching over to this new network, which, in my opinion, shows the real surface temperature of the United States properly, without bias, using state-of-the-art technology and triple redundant sensors, they show that, instead of switching to this, they simply tried to take the old crappy data that is, full of, all of these biases that I have outlined, being next to brick walls, being next to air conditioners, all this other stuff. They take that crappy data and try to adjust it using the other data as a reference. If this were in a court of law, it would get thrown out on its ear. But, it's not. It's climate science. So what we have being reported on a monthly and a yearly basis from NOAA is not the pristine data from USCRN. No, we can't talk about that. We report the adjusted crappy data, which makes it even more uncertain. I'm not sure crappy is even the best word for this. Surely are there better words for this. All right. Douglas Pollock asks, don't you think climate change is redundant? Don't you think it's the same as to worry about the snow whiteness? When has the climate not changed?
That's a good point, Doug. But I would like to point out, if you go to climaterealism.com, there is an article about how they were concerned that the color of snow has been changing because of climate change. So who knows? Who knows what kind of stuff they're worried about. Like we said
in the title,
yeah,
climate change affects everything.
Causes everything.
Yeah. So in that question, are these evil governments preventing Africa from cheaper energy and development of their economies? I would say yes to that, but Sterling's our resident expert on this one.
No, they certainly are. Look, most Western institutions, banks, we put tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into the World Bank every year at the U.S. And we have other banks, other international banks that we're part of, that others are part of. And they were primarily created to help developing countries develop. And yet they have banned new fossil fuel investment. They've purposely done that. Now, thankfully for African countries and Asian countries, our good friends China came to the rescue with the Silk Road Initiative, and they started loaning money for that. They said, oh, well, we're more than happy to, all you have to do is sign sort of agreements with us and be our allies against the U.S. And so we could be providing better technology, helping them develop their energy resources. Instead, we're telling them not to develop their energy resources and saying, but we'll give you this intermittent bad stuff that doesn't work very often. We'll give it to you through your corrupt government that's going to siphon off the money. Instead, China's making both geopolitical inroads in Africa, and they're helping Africa develop, because Western governments have done their best to suppress energy development in Africa.
Yep, China is investing in coal power plants in Africa and stuff like that because China wants to be able to set up railways that we should have completed like 100 years ago.
And probably military alliances and bases, right?
Yep. So it doesn't look good.
I mean, look, just yesterday or the day before, there was a coup in Niger. And who is going to benefit from that? Russia. We're saying, oh, we support the democratic government and not the coup, understandably, but the democratic government wasn't doing much, and that's why there was a coup.
Yeah. All right, that's all we have time for today. We've covered climate change causes everything and multiple topics, and we want to remind you to visit climaterealism.com on a regular basis to find the debunking of these stories in the media, climateataglance.com for factual essays about particular topics in climate that you can use as reference, and also energyataglance.com talking about, unreliables and renewables and all of that sort of stuff and their impact on our society. So there you have it. Climate change causes everything. Thanks, Linnea, and thanks, Sterling, for joining us today. I want to say thank you also to our audience. And I want to say that I'm Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate for the Heartland Institute, wishing you a great day and a great weekend. Bye-bye.